Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the March 7th, 2023 Committee of the Whole public meeting to order. First, acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and I'd like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. I now call for a mover to approve the agenda. Okay, Trustee Presley, thank you. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. I'd now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare. If so, please do so now. Seeing no interests, we can move immediately to the meeting. We have one delegation this evening. So I'd like to call upon Nick Morabito. Mr. Morabito, you have 4 minutes.
Hello. Perfect. I'm going to read from my notes. Thank you. My name is Nick Morabito. I'm a father of 4 children in the school board at 3 schools. My daughters are 10, 12. My sons are 14 and 16. The 6 of us have lived in Manotick for 10 years, and I grew up in Canada. I became aware a few weeks ago that trans students, in particular students that were assigned a male gender at birth, are allowed to use the same bathroom unsupervised as my 12-year-old daughter. Having a 14-year-old boy and having been a 14-year-old boy before, and as a male, knowing how sexually driven a male's body is at the age of 13 onwards, this did not sit well with me. I wasn't present at the board meeting that pushed this policy through, and I can't figure out when this was done. My oldest friends can attest to my belief in the safety and inclusivity of all people. I always have. But this is about having appropriate and safe boundaries for progression and doing things in line with the parental community's wishes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Morabito, on the grounds that this creates an unsafe environment for people who identify as gender diverse, I'm going to have to ask you to end your delegation. We're going to take a 2-minute recess. Good evening again. I apologize for that disruption. As chair, I would like to just note that we respect the right of freedom of expression. However, we remain concerned about the safety, dignity, and human rights of all members of our community, including trans and gender diverse members of our community, both as students, staff, as well as families. So continuing on, we will now have a briefing from the chair of the board. I'd like to call upon Trustee Lyra Evans to provide briefing as chair.
Thank you. Volunteers play an important role in our children's education today. Their life experiences, knowledge, and expertise can have a tremendous impact in the classroom and beyond. These valued partners foster interaction and cooperation between and among the school and a wider community for the benefit of all students. Each year, the OCDSB recognizes the valuable contributions of our community members, parents, and businesses through the OCDSB Community Recognition Awards. Nominations are now open until Friday, April 7th. I would also like to note that today in the parking lot outside our building was the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal's Center's Tour for Humanity bus. This mobile education center is used to run workshops on topics ranging from the Holocaust, genocide, and Canada's human rights history. Multiple classes from Sir Robert Borden participated in learning activities here today, and after a stop at Parliament Hill, students from Broadview Public School and Nepean High School will be participating as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Chair Lyra. All right, so we'll move on now to a briefing from the Associate Director Reynolds. Are there any questions? Sorry, before I move on, are there any questions on Chair Lyra's report? No? Okay. All right, so moving on to Associate Director Reynolds.
Great, thank you. And through you, Chair. On Wednesday, March 29th, the OCDSB will be hosting a webinar on supporting trans and gender diverse children and youth. The webinar will explore how parents and guardians can support young people to be themselves, regardless of age or gender. You can learn more about the session and register on our website. We've been asked by your friends and partners at Ottawa Public Health to remind families to keep up to date with their regular vaccinations. Ottawa Public Health is currently monitoring the emergence of measles in our community. Prevention through vaccination is the best protection, but many children and youth in Ottawa are missing routine vaccinations that would protect them from measles and other vaccine-preventable diseases. For more information, families can speak with their health practitioner or visit Ottawa Public Health's website. I want to share that nominations are open for the 2023 Ontario Public School Board Association's awards. These awards recognize trustees, teachers, education workers, students, or community members for making a difference in their local school or community. The nominations for most awards are open until April 7th. More information can be found at the OPSBA OPSBA website. And finally, I want to acknowledge that next week is March break, an important milestone in the school year. We want to wish all of our students, staff taking time, and their families a safe and relaxing time away. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Associate Director Reynolds? Seeing none, let's move on to Associate Director Reynolds will introduce report 23-015.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm pleased to bring back to the second committee of the whole meeting the slightly revised draft field trip policy for your consideration before it comes back to board, hopefully for final approval. So following the discussion that we had at the previous Cal meeting and some fairly robust feedback we received through the consultation, mostly from parents, guardians, but also somewhat from staff, we did make a couple of tweaks to the draft that you see before you and hoping that it clarified a few issues. Firstly, one of the things that was causing the most concern or confusion, and we heard it at the meeting here, was the use of the word minimal cost. People were concerned that meant that if trips were not free or next to free, that they would not be permitted. We just want to reiterate that it's not the intention of the district to recommend moving away from running field trips, even if they do have, in some cases, a higher price tag or cost attached to them. Some of those trips offer excellent learning opportunities for students, and we see those continuing. What we do want to make clear is that those any student who would fall under a protected ground is not experiencing a barrier or discrimination and is not able to access those opportunities, and that includes socioeconomic status. So we'll be working through the procedure and our principals and our school staff to identify multiple ways in which costs may be kept at a minimum or limited for students who need that support, and that students who do need that support are able to access it in a way that does not require them to put up their hand and draw attention to themselves, that secures their dignity. That is of utmost concern. So things such as bursaries, fundraising, sister schools or partner schools that help to offset costs. There's a number of strategies that we can put forward and work with our principals to implement. Some of the other changes that are here is there were concerns around athletics being specifically identified as not being under the field trip policy. We also want to reassure the public that athletic field trips will still continue and they will be governed by their own procedure. There are some elements that didn't necessarily or neatly apply to athletic trips, particularly around curriculum and learning, as those trips do have a specific purpose, but athletic trips are still falling under this general policy, but will have their own procedure because of the different nature of the paperwork that is required there. I think that's the bulk of the more significant changes and the messages that we wanted to get across. But of course, we're welcome to take questions, hear further input to help guide us in bringing forward a final draft, hopefully for approval.
Thank you. And I now call for a mover for the recommendation. Trustee Scott, I saw your hand up. Was it a question or did you want to start?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question, but I'm happy to move the recommendation. And I think it's timely to be revising this policy. And I think overall, the consultation has produced some really worthwhile input and feedback. And I'm pleased to note that staff have responded to that with changes in what their original language had been for the changes in the policy, because it's important to do our best to get these things right. I have had some questions, however, about how this policy would apply, or if it would apply to some of the other kinds of extracurricular activities that may happen outside of school hours. Things like the ski clubs that some schools run, things like potential visits to evening performances or other events outside of regular school hours. So if staff could please clarify that, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, it is our intention to see those types of trips and activities continue. They would obviously fall under, if it involved leaving the school property, under this policy and the associated procedure, but there's no intention to hamper or diminish or reduce those opportunities for students that happen extracurricularly. I think really what the policy is going to be moving towards is ensuring that there, any risks towards safety are mitigated, costs are kept reasonable or offset, and that any other barriers to participation are reduced. But we want to keep seeing those things happening.
Thank you very much for that answer.
Are there any other questions pertaining to this item? Okay, so mover, do you want to wrap up?
None required.
Okay, very well. So all those in favor? Carried. All right, moving on. We now turn to Trustee Lyra to introduce a motion.
So could we get it on the screen? There it is. So this motion seeks to address a concern that I have heard and had for a number of years about being environmental stewards at the district. The City of Ottawa has now implemented a universal composting option for residents. It has been years since many businesses have implemented universal recycling programs. And so to be a school board as large as ours, with as many buildings and as many people interacting with them on a daily basis, without having access to universal blue bin recycling, without having access to composting, really shows that we are not leaders when it comes to environmental stewardship, when it comes to making sure that we are protecting the environment and ensuring that our future generations understand the importance of recycling, of composting, and of environmental sustainability. And so this motion seeks to do three things. The first of which is to implement a universal recycling and composting program at every school and administrative site by the end of the 2023-2024 school year, which is not this year, it's next year. That gives us lots of lead time to make sure that we have the time to implement this program at all of our sites. It seeks, second, to ensure that we have a hands-on learning experience for our students. It teaches students that they are personally responsible for environmental sustainability, that they are individually capable and responsible for making sure that they don't just throw tin cans in the garbage. And so this would get students engaged in a hands-on, meaningful way. And that would be implemented by the end of the 2024-2025 school year. And third, that the district would seek to promote this program. I think that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board has the potential to be a leader in the field and to show other districts around the province what could be done, what we can do to make sure that we are being and raising the leaders of the future when it comes to the environment. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have Trustee Lee on the speakers list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So question for the mover. Just to clarify, the intent of the motion is to essentially implement the citywide program and not to create a localized program at the school. What I mean by that is I recently had discussed, had been at a school council meeting with Brookfield High School where they were implementing a school-based composting system with worms and all that at a significant cost. So I just want to clarify that the intent is to implement the existing city program.
So having seen the nod from the chair. So the intent of this is to make sure that a composting option is available at each school, with the baseline being the city. But if an individual Leaf Club or other environmental student group wants to take an extra step and go to composting on site with worms, that's an option that they could undertake. But it would be that at a minimum, every school has a composting program available to it.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank the staff for their detailed memorandum with regards to this item. The concern was if the direction was for more elaborate systems that, given our precarious budget situation, that would put additional strain. But from this clarification in the memo, it seems that is not a concern that we have to worry about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I'd like to thank Trustee Lyer for bringing forward this motion. In terms of sustainability and environmentalism, Trustee Lee just asked the question I was about to ask, so thank you for that. Just in comment, I would like to say that as the largest district school board in the city, the issues facing our environment and climate change are not going anywhere anytime soon. And yes, I understand that this could be a major budgetary consideration. This problem is not going to go away. And the sooner we start taking direct action to it, the sooner we will start to see the turnaround of cost savings. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. And student who? How? I apologize. Student How. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start by requesting a non-binding vote on this one. Haven't done that in a while. And expressing my support for this motion. Thank you, Trustee Lyra, for bringing it up. In-school recycling and waste is something that has come up countless times at Student Senate. It's probably one of, if not the most common thing that I hear. And even if you just walk into a school, when you look at the garbage, it's just largely composed of things that easily could have been recycled or composted, and that should have been recycled or composted. As the motion outlined, our strategic plan is committed to progressive stewardship of the environment, and recycling is one of the most rudimentary steps that we can take towards fulfilling that commitment. And it's not a radical ask, it's recycling. For many students, the first thought now is just to toss things out. I know that I don't even look for a recycling bin, if I'm being completely honest, and that's not a good thing. And if students aren't recycling for the first 17 or 18 years of their lives, they likely won't for the rest. But as student trust, that's me. As Trustee Lyra noted, if we can implement these small habits in our students, we'll be able to foster a much larger sense of environmental stewardship and leadership. And once again, just urge everyone to support this because I can't vote. Thank you.
We have one more speaker on our list, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having seen various sizes and scales of recycling and composting programs already happening in a number of our schools, I guess the question in my mind is, how does this actually change things? Because I think through you, I will ask if staff can clarify this and a couple of other things in a moment. But I believe that all of our schools are currently equipped with recycling bins and so on, and that there are clear directions as to how to separate different kinds of things. I don't think that there's very much policing of how students use the recycling bins and so on. There are a number of schools that have composting programs, mostly in conjunction with their science classes. So it's not a school-wide thing, but it is at least something that is giving students hands-on experience in what it means to compost and the benefits that you get from composting. And the other question is about the cafeterias in our secondary schools specifically. because certainly in the preparation of food for the students, they are probably also producing a significant amount of food waste. And I'm wondering what if any provisions are in place around recycling and composting by the cafeteria service providers. So if staff could perhaps respond to those, and I really appreciated seeing the memo that's on our desks this evening, and perhaps they could also comment on that, on the contents of that memo. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the question. So certainly I'll be turning things over to Associate Director Jerwa in just a moment. We certainly support any increase in efforts to lessen the impact on the environment of the district. We do have a lot of buildings, a lot of students, a lot of people, and we certainly think there's room for growth in terms of expanding or streamlining our current recycling initiatives and perhaps making some foray into making some further strides into the recycling or composting of organic waste. And the way I'm reading this, that each school would have some form of a composting program is what we are striving for at this point. And I'm sure Associate Director Jarwal will touch on this, although I'm not sure if we can talk about knowledgeably what our service providers do. I didn't get that background information prior to this meeting, our cafeteria service providers. But in implementing this, there will be an increase in workload for some, for sure, and that needs to be noted. Our care staff do already operate, maximizing the hours that they have, and we don't anticipate being able to increase those hours. So, that's something just to be a little bit mindful of. We'll hope to enlist staff and student volunteers, and where appropriate, may be integrated into some existing clubs and or courses, but that would be somewhat limited depending from school to school. But to see, a full composting or recycling across an entire school, especially when we look at some of our larger elementary and secondary schools, that would be challenging. I know West Carleton a number of years ago, when there was a staff champion, if I recall correctly, was engaging in the green bin program, and they were producing over 30 green bins a week. So that's fairly substantial. It's good. It's a good output in terms of recycling, but it was a considerable amount of effort. And when the champion left, I think the program stopped. And that's one of the challenges we run into with this. Sorry for that little bit of a rambling introduction, but I'll turn things over to the Associate Director to provide more information.
So one of your questions was, sorry, through you, Chair. One of your questions was about what the third-party food service providers or our cafeterias are doing, and so I've reached out to get an answer on that, because it wasn't part of the package that was provided to me. But I don't think there's a standard of what they're providing. So pre-COVID, at its peak, we probably had about 50 schools participating in a composting type program. All schools had a recycling black and blue bin type program, but only about 50 schools were registered with the city, and they must register through the school board with the city for a composting program. And then once the pandemic hit, I think that dwindled significantly, and now that the kids are back in school, we haven't really had the same push on blue and black bin recycling or composting that we had pre-pandemic. And the team here was actually, prior to the motion being put forward, we're already working on increasing recycling in the blue and black bin areas. But probably the biggest challenge for us is the composting part. And one of the reasons why that's a challenge is because, as Associate Director Reynolds had mentioned, it's really incumbent upon a champion in the school making that program work. And when the champion leaves, or if we can't find the volunteers to support the program, one person can't do it alone and make it happen. And to put that responsibility on the custodian it's not the right place. Not the right person to be the champion. Obviously, they have a large role to play in making sure that the tools and recycling bins are available, and reaching out to the city and making sure that we have a safe space for those type of the products. But it's the teachers and the volunteers that make it work. And to mandate it, it hasn't worked in the past when we've tried to find volunteers to run the program and they weren't willing to do it. So that's probably one of my biggest concerns is that I think we can promote it and I think we can support it in a lot of different ways, especially the blue and the black bin recycling. I'm a little concerned with where we can go with the composting. Even when we were doing the composting in the past, we weren't doing as much food waste as we were pizza boxes and cardboard. And the city, so my team reached out and spoke with the city, and that's not uncommon across not just our school board, but all the school boards in the district or in the area that have participated in these composting programs. They don't actually generate a lot of food waste or compostable waste. It's often they weren't getting the volume they needed. So they're actually, the city's thinking about not supporting these programs moving forward. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you. That goes a long way to answering my question. I guess one of the things, I mean, I really think that composting is important, but you have to be able to have the space to do it. You have to be able to do it more or less right. And I don't think I will ever forget the day that I got the call that West Carleton was in a secure school mode because Mother Bear had managed to leave her 2 cubs behind the school, having deposited them in the most in the best possible environment for 2 cubs to be entertained without their mother, which was in the dumpster behind the cafeteria. Where clearly they had all kinds of exciting things to explore. Being rural, that is a hazard when you compost, if you have very much food waste, and particularly if you have animal food waste. So that is something that would need to be considered, because it's not just in the country, but we have predators that are interested in any free food they can find in the urban areas as well. So I think that in terms of having a big push for recycling and composting, I think that's a really important thing to do. But I'm very hesitant about trying to make it mandatory, simply because there are so many of our staff who are already feeling a great deal of pressure to do things. So if I may, Madam Chair, I have one more question, and that is through you. Do most of our elementary and secondary schools have environmental clubs? They used to, and I suspect quite a few of them still do.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I can't give you a number. I would imagine that many of our secondary schools do, and perhaps more so where we have intermediate programs. I would think it may have different names, but clubs or student groups that do tackle environmental related issues. I don't necessarily want to put Principal Nordman on the spot, but he does have, I'm more familiar with the secondary environment. Perhaps he could comment if he's seen or heard of such things in the elementary.
Thanks, Associate Director Reynolds, through you, Chair. I would say that because of pandemic, of course, elementary school clubs and teams and that sort of thing, there was a pause coming back this year. I would say across our district that the reintegration of those types of activities is happening, but not necessarily as a pace that we would have seen prior to the pandemic. I know my school, for instance, we don't have an environmental club. We do recycling, black box and paper recycling, but that's it. And to kind of reiterate some of the things that Trustee Scott has said and Associate Director Giroux have said, I really think that you know, the people power behind this initiative would be, you know, there would be some schools that would be all for and on board, and there would be some schools that would be struggling to find not only staff, but maybe even student groups to participate in it if it were a club. And I think about the, you know, the time and energy, as Trustee Scott has said and Associate Director Reynolds has said, about people who are champions within buildings. And some schools are not going to have these champions. And that's just the reality of that situation at this point in time. So a bit of a long-winded answer for putting Principal Nordman on the spot.
Thank you. All right, continuing on our list of speakers, I have Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Can you guys hear me in the boardroom? Thank you, and thank you, Chair, for chairing today's meeting. Much appreciated. I want to speak quickly and broadly about this motion put forth by Trustee Lyra. I think it's a fantastic effort as we have seen, long-term environmental impacts in Ottawa, especially with many of us disappointed with the canal not opening this year. That's a real effect of our climate crisis, and we can't ignore that. It's a really small step in implementing things like recycling and composting. But I remember, when I was looking at blue bins and black bins in my time at school, there was just like a little list, and it took 3 seconds to figure out where I was going to get in trouble for like trying to dunk my recyclable juice box, right? Or bottle of water. So not to encourage that in school, but it's an easy thing for students to do. But I do appreciate Trustee Scott's concerns and those brought by Principal Nordman. I think the on the ground operational considerations are important. And I remember, in looking at some of the staff recommendations regarding boomerang lunches, I do hear a lot of concerns from parents about boomerang lunches in terms of bringing things back home, it being a mess, and lunch bags, and so forth. I think this it's operationally can be difficult to get started back up again. But I think an important part about this can be learning from past experiences and learning from each other, whether it's information sharing between rural schools who might be in different zones, but learning about, for example, Trustee Scott's story about the bears, right? Like we can learn from that. We can work with our students. There's a lot of opportunity as the mover mentioned for us to lead in this area. And as such a big school board, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. And in the grand scheme of environmental and climate concerns in Ottawa, I really appreciate the opportunity to explore this motion and implore my colleagues to consider it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Aziz. And now Trustee Bell.
Thank you, and I'll begin by echoing my gratitude to you, Trustee Kaplan-Myrth, for taking on the chair role today. It was Secretary General Ban Ki-moon who really hit home when he said, we're the last generation that can take steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And future generations, they're going to judge us very harshly on our moral and our historical obligation. This is basic. This should be mandated years ago. And I think our student trustees said it really simply. Students want this. This is top of their agenda. I think Trustee Lyra, I appreciate your motion, but I think it can go further. I think we have to go further. And I think the costs associated with going further will be a lot less, as has already been mentioned, down the line if we don't do this. If we don't start putting the possibilities of making an impact and change into the hands of our students now, then we're failing as leaders. That's how I see it. Concretely, my question is, my daughter comes home with all of her lunch material in her bag. And so how would this change? How can we ensure that when she's at school, she's being taught and it's being encouraged that that her orange peel go into a bin, that if she has wax paper, that it goes into the appropriate bin. This is a 7-year-old, so in the elementary school system. How are we going to ensure that teaching and that education on a day-to-day basis is taking place? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. My apologies, Trustee Jenkins, you are next.
No problem. Thank you, Chair.
There was a question from Trustee Bell.
Oh.
Question for staff from Sorry,
Yeah, so
trustee Bell.
this was definitely for staff, is how can you foresee this? And then actually, you can also speak to how could you foresee us tracking and monitoring our how successful this motion will be? So it's two-part. How's it going to change for my daughter or a 7-year-old, the average 7-year-old in the board? And how are we going to track and ensure that this is a success?
Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Based on the motion that we have before us, I don't think it necessarily would preclude boomerang lunches from continuing. That's what it sounds like you are describing. But there would be recycling opportunities in the school. We can undertake some education, certainly, and some promotion of using the bins that are provided, as we do now. There are blue and black bins in our schools, but use the word ensure. And I don't think that we will have an opportunity to ensure that every child recycles every piece of material that they have. We'll work with them. We'll encourage them where we see behaviors that we can change. We will. But you've been in schools, Trustee Bell. They're very busy places, and the staff are running flat out every day, looking after the other basic needs and learning needs of the students that are there. And so, I certainly can't. It would be disingenuous of me to sit here and guarantee that every student will be taught how to appropriately recycle every piece, and that recycling will happen at school. That simply, I don't think possible with what we have. Although I certainly understand the call to action that I've heard from you and from others. What I do see here is that a commitment to have blue, black bin, and composting programs in every school. I think we can make that work. I think in making that work, that's a good first step. There will be opportunities for that to grow over time. But I do want to, be upfront and say that I think those programs, particularly the composting ones, may look different from school to school. And where we do have staff champions and students volunteering, they'll make greater strides quicker, and the other schools will require a little more time to move along.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just that follow-up. If not tonight, could we get a written answer on how we could monitor the success of this program and how we could foresee what would be the goalposts and how we are moving towards that? Thank you, Associate Director Reynolds, for answering.
Okay. All right. Now we will go to Trustee Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm supportive, absolutely supportive of the recycling program. In terms of the boomerang lunch, though, for me as a parent, although my children are long out of school, but I think it's an opportunity for parents to bond with their children and teach those simple little things how to recycle. So I don't think it should be fully on the schools, certainly at both ends, but not take it over fully, the responsibility of understanding what goes in what basket. But in terms of the composting, I share with Trustee Scott the concerns about composting. Certainly in my zone, it's suburban as well as rural. In Riverside South, we have a problem with coyotes every year, and now there's also sightings of fox. So I'm concerned that composting in some of the schools in my zone would encourage those lovely animals to participate closer to the school. So I'm not sure how that would look, and perhaps as Director Reynolds has said, that it may look differently. But I also think we should encourage promoting more opportunities with our community gardens. I think there's great opportunity for students to learn how to grow vegetables, how to perhaps what to do with those vegetables after, and even have, little sales or something at the end of the season where, they can learn about small businesses selling, the cost of selling things. But if there's opportunity to work more with the City of Ottawa as well, and in just learning about our environmental responsibility. Otherwise, anyway, I'm supportive of the program. I'm just a little concerned about the composting aspect. No questions.
Thank you, trustee Jenkins. And now we have a question from Lily Miller.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to, a couple of things, as an Indigenous person and on behalf of the Indigenous Education Council, you know, and thinking about your land acknowledgement, and how the Algonquin people have been stewards of the land since time immemorial, and your appreciation of holding the meeting here and having your schools on the land. It also creates the opportunity for you to take some responsibility for the land as well. And the responsibility is, as far as compost goes, when these the food waste goes into the landfill, not only does it create a bigger landfill, which of course we know is a problem, but it is composted without oxygen, which creates methane gas. And methane gas is the most powerful greenhouse gas and is a big problem with global warming. So knowing that, there's one motivation. Knowing that students are experiencing a high amount of anxiety, worry about, they know about climate change, and they know that, and students, young people do feel like they don't have the power to make a difference. So I feel like this will give them that ability to make a difference, and let them see that their actions can have impact. And also, I would love to see, as always, accountability, but and mandated. But at the same time, I recognize in my advocacy that small steps are steps to the big steps. So, you know, I see this as a small step, and I see no reason why schools can't do this. The students, there are students who are keen to do something about this. So I just wanted to show my support about that.
Thank you, Lily Miller. Before I go to second questions, may I ask a question? Can I pick myself on? Would you chair for me?
Absolutely. So who's next on the list, though?
There's only me as
Okay.
a first, and then we'll go to
All right.
seconds. So I would also like to support this motion. I think that, as others have said, we have a responsibility to take care of the land, and we have a responsibility to our children and future generations. I find myself wondering whether there's a way that this could be seen as a project in collaboration with the city of Ottawa, because we would also reduce non-recyclable and non-compostable waste if we were to succeed in increasing how much students recycle and compost. And I wonder whether it could be schools supported to do that as a way to reduce our footprint. So that brings me to the question, which I think I would pose to the mover of this motion, which is in point C, you say that the district promote the program, and I'm wondering in what tangible way could it be promoted so that it would be more than just the current status quo, which is that there are recycling bins, and we're reliant on just individual clubs. How could we effectively promote it so that it would be seen as something that schools would strive to do, like maybe in a good kind of spirit of competition way? I don't know if I can ask you that question.
Go ahead, trustee Lara.
So when I talk about promoting the program, we've heard that there's concerns in rural areas. If we find a way to compost in a rural area, we should tell all of the rural districts around us. We heard that there are not a lot of school boards around the province who have universal composting programs. If we are able to successfully figure out a way to do that, then we should be telling other school boards how to do that. Humans do best when we are learning from the successes of others. And in that vein, there are jurisdictions outside of Ontario that have mandatory student engagement in recycling and composting. So there are some jurisdictions where every student has an opportunity to engage in a hands-on. It's Friday. It's the first Friday, so it is your turn to make sure that the recycling and the compost and the garbage were appropriately sorted. And so that's a model of hands-on engagement that has not been utilized anywhere in Ontario, but has been successfully utilized in other areas around the world. And if we were to implement something like that successfully, we could show that this model works in Ontario and try and convince other jurisdictions to that end. That we could promote the success of this project.
Any additional questions?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
And so the chair goes back to you.
Very well. So I'll move on to people who had second questions. And Chair Lyra, you actually had a question. You were first in line.
So I heard something that was a little bit conflicting. Associate Director Giroir, can you confirm that all of our schools do or do not have blue bin recycling programs at this time?
I can confirm that they all have blue and black bin programs of some nature. They're not necessarily doing it as well as they were pre-pandemic. And there is a new push to kind of get back to those levels within the schools, but the push has been more individual school to individual school, and we haven't really gone out with a campaign or anything like that. And I know that it's not just blue bin and black bin recycling. There's some other recycling initiatives also going on with furniture and other components too. So I know that Tom Thistle, who's not here tonight, has been championing a couple of these initiatives as well, with many of the school boards and many of the schools in the district.
Okay. Because it was my understanding based on conversations with people in some of my schools that they didn't think there was a blue bin recycling program. And so I don't know if it's just because it wasn't in their every classroom or if it was.
So that's what I'm kind of saying is that we don't have it in every classroom like we did pre-pandemic, and they're rolling them back out into the classrooms like they have in the past. But there's no school that doesn't have a blue bin or black bin somewhere within the school, just not as accessible and not promoted the way it was pre-pandemic.
Okay. The other question or comment that I had was around boomerang lunches. The district has been promoting boomerang lunches at least since I was in school. And they are not a waste management plan. They're a waste diversion plan. Instead of dealing with the waste that are generated by our students or our staff and recycling or composting it on site, we just send it all home. And then we ask each of the parents of those students to recycle or compost accordingly. And I think that is a bit of a kicking the can to the other side of the fence and pretending it's no longer litter. And so I think that if we as a district want to take seriously recycling, instead of focusing on boomerang lunches, we should be focusing on dealing with the waste that our students and our staff produce. I do hear about what you said about Trustee Jenikins about what it's an opportunity for bonding between a parent and a child sometimes. You are no doubt a very good parent, but I cannot say that 100% of our students would have parents who take to heart the importance of recycling and want to take that as an opportunity to teach them. And so I do think that those bonding moments can happen on weekends, they can happen over the summer, they can happen at other times, but I really do think that we can't just kick our litter home. And for those reasons, I really think this motion is better than pushing for more boomerang lunches. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Trustee Scott, you had another question as well.
And I believe Trustee Nash had her hand up as well around the same time. And I thought she was maybe a first-time speaker.
I apologize. I did not see your hand up. So Trustee Nash, let's start with you.
Actually, I didn't have a question. I realized, no, if I have a question, I wanted to speak. I just wanted to support the motion. And so I thought, well, this is not the purpose for us for a question, but so that's why thank you for noticing, but it was more to support the motion.
Okay. All right, very good. So trustee Scott?
Thank you. I did have one further question for staff. And I hope my colleagues don't get me wrong. I'm all for recycling and composting. It's just that there are practical considerations attached to that. And I would really like to see an organic push coming from our students in all of the schools, the students who should be reforming those environmental sustainability clubs, and the staff, frankly, who should also be incorporating ideas about this when they're dealing with the curriculum and with good social behavior. The question I have for staff, however, relates, I know that a number of years ago, the city did not collect any of our waste. We had to pay for waste collection, and that included also whatever recycling materials we had for recycling, that we also had to pay for that. Is that still the case? And if so, would this initiative make a difference to how much our costs were in terms of waste management for all of the facilities in the district? I have no idea whether it might push it up or whether it might push it down, but I think it would be important to have some understanding of that before we take the final vote on this at board.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Associate Director Jarawa seems eager to answer.
I spoke to Tom, who's been in contact with the city, and I think I mentioned a little earlier on that the city's not been happy with the way the composting program has been working within schools within Ottawa, and so there's not a firm commitment for them to continue to provide free pickup services. But as it stands right now, if you register with the city, they will pick up the composting bins and the recycling bins for free. I'm not sure how long that'll be. The other concern that you mentioned was costs to the schools and to the district. One of the concerns that we have is pest management and safe location for composting bins, especially for those schools that aren't participating with vigor and effort. And so we would have to work hard to find safe places to put these composting bins, and pest management has been an issue in the district in some schools, and I think this could exacerbate the issue. Riverside South, for example, has a huge rat issue. They had to shut down the fire station there because of the infestation of rats and things like that, and so that's not an uncommon issue within this city. And I think composting does have a risk of perpetuating pest management problems within some of our schools. And I think that's worthy of consideration. So I think there's places where we can do this really well. And when there's a lot of active engagement in it, it could probably be very successful if there's the right location, the right tools, the right storage facilities and whatnot. But not all schools have those. And some schools are more prone to problems than others.
Thank you very much for that response. Any additional information with regard to potential costs that is available by the time of the board meeting would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Trustee Presley, you had no question.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just to potentially respond to some of my colleagues' comments in regards to the composting program. From my discussions that I've been having with city councillors and members of parliament recently, it's been indicated that if a need has been shown, the city will follow suit in terms of composting. So I think that's an important consideration to keep in mind. Speaking about the rat issue, I'm a very experienced realtor and I've dealt with many clients and issues of this nature with pests. And I would actually argue that by having the composting programs, we would be cutting down on potential pest issues because we would have these items in a centralized place as opposed to being spewed around garbage cans and put into landfills, or maybe even just being distributed on the ground. So I think that's something to consider as well. Being even in an urban area, we have raccoons, we have foxes in my neighborhood, and I live, across from IKEA. there are mitigation measures that we can be taking to ensure that we don't have any of our neighborhood animal friends coming into our school grounds and creating a safety issue for our students or staff. And I think that would be something that the board could implement an education program based on school by school to mitigate those issues and ensure that we have safe facilities in order to go through these programs.
Thank you, Trustee Presley. Are there any other questions? Second questions from anybody? Student Trustee Howe, go ahead.
I just have two things. So firstly, although the main focus of the motion is recycling and composting, I think the educational aspect is also just as important. I've heard from around the table that student-led initiatives like environmental clubs aren't running at the rate that they once were. And honestly, I find that pretty surprising and concerning because I remember being in grade 5 when students were basically fighting over who would get to take the recycling to the dumpster, and not because nobody wanted to do it, but because everybody wanted to do it. And I guess maybe as you get older, you lose the spark, but I think that educational aspect's really, really important to make sure that, you know, that little fire inside is still there, and that urge to want to bring the recycling bins to the dumpster or to the big recycling bin outside is still there. And I guess this is a question for the mover. You mentioned when it came to that, I think there's the third clause with the promotion about sort of communicating with other boards and regions. And I'm just wondering, does the promotional aspect also sort of include more formal communication about the programs internally? So like making sure that it's not just mandatory, but well known, because I think there's sort of a difference there.
So I left this intentionally vague because I think that we should be promoting it internally. I think we should be promoting it to other districts. I think we should be promoting it to the city. I think we should be telling everybody that we partner that we want to value this, that we think it's important. And so rather than try and list everybody I think we should promote it to, I just left it as we should promote the program.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, thank you. If there are no other second questions, we'll go to Trustee Presley.
Just wanted to move to close discussions and move to a vote.
You
Very
can't
good.
do that.
No.
You've spoken.
Oh, yes. My apologies.
Okay, so. Right, so Trustee Howe had asked for a non-binding vote, so we can go forward with a non-binding vote at this point. So we're just doing a roll call. All right, so roll call. Do you want me to go around the room? Okay, perfect.
Trustee Milburn?
Sorry, yes.
Trustee Lee?
Yes.
Trustee Lyra?
In favor?
Trustee Jenkins?
In favor?
Trustee Scott?
In favor?
Trustee Nash?
In favor?
Trustee Presley?
In favor.
Trustee Dixon?
In favor.
Trustee Bell?
In favor.
Trustee Aziz?
In favor.
Student Trustee Al-Dalami? I believe she is here. Student Trustee Howe?
In favor.
Okay, and the vote carries. I didn't get to vote, but I am in favor.
Trustee Kaplan Mirth?
That's okay, in favor. So the motion carries.
We now vote again, but you can just call that.
Okay, so we will now vote again. So all in favor? And the motion carries. Thank you. So moving along, we'll now go to item 9, report from statutory and other committees. And I'll call a mover to receive the report of the Advisory Committee on Equity from the 1st of December, 2022. Trustee Presley, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. I now call for a mover to receive the report of the Parent Involvement Committee of 18th of January, 2023. Thank you, Trustee Nash. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, that's carried. I now call a mover to receive the report of the Indigenous Education Council from the 19th of January, 2023. Thank you, Trustee Scott. Are there any errors or omissions? No? Okay. All in favor? That's carried. I now call for a mover to receive the report of the Special Education Advisory Committee from 1st of February, 2023. Thank you, Trustee Nash. Are there any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. I now call for a mover to receive the report of the Audit Committee from 15th of February, 2023. Thank you, Trustee Scott. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? And that's carried. All right, so moving on to matters for discussion. I'll now call upon Associate Director Reynolds to introduce report 23.005.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, happy to have now Executive Officer McCoy speak to the report.
Thank you, Associate Director Reynolds, and I'm very pleased this evening to be presenting to the committee for discussion proposed revisions to policy P019, our Special Education Advisory Committee policy, to expand the membership of the Special Education Advisory Committee to include up to two representatives who would be recommended by the Indigenous Education Council to represent Indigenous students with special education needs in the district. This was a request that was initiated by the Indigenous Education Council. And so staff looked at the regulation which establishes the Special Education Advisory Committee and also sets out in regulation what the membership of that committee is. And have determined that the board does have the discretion to increase the membership to provide for these two additional members of the committee, and as well to make changes to the policy which exists to set out the membership of the committee. The proposed revisions to the policy are provided as part of the report this evening. And as noted in the report, the proposed revisions have already been to the Indigenous Education Council at their last meeting, as well as to the Special Education Advisory Committee. So there's been an opportunity through both of those advisory committees to review the proposed revisions. And although I wasn't present, my understanding is that there was support for the proposal at both of those committees. And I'm not sure if the representatives from those committees are present this evening, but would certainly invite them to provide an update from the advisory committees this evening as well. Also want to note that Superintendent Smith and Superintendent Simmons are here as well, and they were present at the advisory committees for those discussions if you have specific questions for them.
Thank you very much. And so we have as a first question, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was very happy to see this report and this proposal come forward with the draft policy already put in place. Certainly, there was a very rich discussion of the proposal and the policy at the Indigenous Education Council meeting, and one of the outstanding questions was in terms of how representatives would or could be chosen. So if it could be clarified, please, would the choice of representatives be part of a procedure, or would it be left entirely to the Indigenous Education Council to determine how the representatives would be chosen?
Thank you for that question. Turn to staff. Yeah.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Trustee Scott. So we do currently have a procedure which deals with the appointment of the community representatives and local associations to the Special Education Advisory Committee. So staff has already looked at what changes would be required to provide for the appointment of these members as part of that procedure, and would certainly propose doing that in consultation with the Indigenous Education Council. But in summary, it would, the procedures would be developed to provide the Indigenous Education Council with the discretion to invite members and to determine who the members are that they would be recommending. The regulation does require that all members would need to be approved by the board. And so the names of the representatives would be submitted to the board for approval in the same way that other members of SEAC are currently appointed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I think this would be an amazing and important addition to the SEAC.
Thank you. Does that complete your question? Yep. Okay. We have Chair Lyra has a question.
So the only question I have is a question of clarification. It says that C, up to 2 members to represent the interests of Indigenous students with special education needs. I'm just confirming that those are 2 members that would be 2 people that would become members of SEAC and not 2 people that are members of IAC.
So through you, Chair, those would be 2 members of SEAC, and in fact, the regulation precludes members of SEAC from being members who sit on another committee of the board, and so they couldn't actually be members of IAC on the basis that they would be members of another committee of the board.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to make sure that we weren't inadvertently violating that regulation. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this issue? Tom Holloway, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'd like to first commend for adding the Indigenous folks to this. I think it's great for that input. I did have a couple comments though on with regards to OCASC itself. I know we didn't receive any notice of change nor was there any consultation, but that being said, I don't know if there really is. So I wanted to get first some clarification as to, I guess the rationale for moving OCASC further down the line, and I guess if there was any difference or change really from the board's perspective in the way that OCASC, I guess, was being treated in the sense their interactions, their ability to serve on this board, whether or not there's a different process in terms of the OCASC member being appointed to this group. So I'd like to understand that.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if that would go to you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I wasn't entirely clear, I think, on the second part of the question, which was around OCASC not being involved in consultation pertaining to this change. I do think SEAC had been spoken with. I believe there's an OCASC rep at SEAC. So, I think OCASC had an opportunity to speak to this, but perhaps I'm misunderstanding the question.
Well, no, that certainly helps clarifies the first part of my question. I appreciate that. I'll certainly follow up with our SEAC rep. I guess we weren't aware of that as far as a group. And then the second part was just in terms of the rationale for moving OCASC to a separate location, sort of in this policy, and if it somehow, again, because I'm just looking at it tonight for my first time and understanding sort of the ramifications of it. if there's really any substantive change in the way the board views sort of the relationship with OCASC and their involvement on this committee, or the selection process for appointing members of OCASC to the committee.
Okay, I thank you and appreciate the further clarification. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll ask Executive Officer McCoy to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, just to clarify that the changes that are being proposed to the policy in no way impact on the status of the other members of the committee. All it does is simply expand the committee so that there would be 2 additional members who would be specifically appointed to represent the interests of Indigenous students with special education needs. And so certainly, while we had the opportunity to review the policy, made some other changes. So for example, brought it into line with the formatting that we are now doing with policies, and an opportunity to clean up some of the language, but certainly no intention to in any way impact on the status of the other members of the committee, including the OCASC member.
Okay, great. And if I could just add, this is just with the changes and sort of, I guess this is more just quick wordsmithing. One is, I think, so there's the way it's been moved down below, there's no indication that OCASC can have an alternate member because it's been separated from that first part. We usually name a member and an alternate member. So I don't know if that's something to be added. And then with that additional section, I noticed that local associations is now a defined term, and although there is a defined term for additional members and for the new community representative members, that defined term is not, neither of those 2 defined terms are used in section 4.5 there. So I didn't know if that was just, I mean, so that's just a thought in taking a look at it, that we're not using the definitions that are being defined.
Thank you. Noted. We'll consider that.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question, and thank you, Executive Officer McCoy, for answering questions. Are there any other questions? Yes, Trustee Scott.
Yeah, just a comment for the record. OCASC and its predecessor have always been appointed as a group that was outside the realm of the 12 local chapters of provincially incorporated associations dealing with exceptional pupils, because it was not incorporated and it was not a provincial association. But that extra clause in the regulation allowed us to include OCASC as with a full membership, and like all the other association members, OCASC has always had the opportunity to appoint an alternate.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra.
Is it staff's opinion that this as written empowers OCASC to appoint an alternate?
I don't know, Executive Officer, if you can address that at the moment.
So through you, Chair, we did make note of it, and it is something that we'll go back and just confirm in terms of, it certainly wasn't the intention, as I said, to change the status of OCASC's membership on the committee. And so if we need to go back and make another change, then we will do that before it comes back to the board for action, which we anticipate will be at the April COW, and then for final approval at the April board meeting.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions on this matter? No? All right, seeing none, let's move on to a report from OPSBA. I'll call on Trustee Scott or Trustee Jenkins to provide an OPSBA report if required.
I have none.
The only thing to flag is that registration is now open for the OPSBA Labor Relations Conference in late April, and emails have been sent out, I believe, to all trustees.
Thank you for that. All right, and now an OSTA update. Do we have an OSTA update this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of OSTA, I bring 2 updates, some of it which is backlogged because we haven't gotten to this point in the agenda in 2 previous Committee of the Whole meetings. The first is that decision was made at the January Board of Directors meeting of the Ottawa Student Transportation Association that the MTC program would continue to be discontinued for the remainder of this academic year. This is primarily due to the continued shortage of bus drivers and the stress that it would put on the transportation system should we bring back the empty seat program at this time. Decision will be made later in the spring as to whether the empty seat program will be brought back for the next school year. The second update is with regards to a governance and risk management structure at OSTA. The board is embarking on a risk assessment of the school system, of the transportation system, including looking at potential changes to eligibility or bell times as part of a system-wide review. I do note that a system-wide review has not been undertaken by OSTA since about 2014. So given that it's been about a decade since that's happened, it's quite timely for that to happen. One of the key drivers behind that is with regards to the growing stress and demands on this transportation system, especially in rapidly growing neighborhoods such as Barrhaven, where the bell times and other aspects of the system have not been dramatically overhauled. They've just been touched up as needed. So given the continued and foreseeable shortage of bus drivers into the near future, this is a action that the OSTA board has decided to undertake for the rest of this year and into next year.
Thank you for that, Trustee Lee. Do we have any questions for OSTA? Trustee Lyra. Trustee Nash.
If my son was missing for 1 hour and the school and the bus, the distance is only 4 kilometers and I had no information as to where my son was, I'd be very frantic. And this has happened at one of my schools. And I've heard so many comments. I know there's a lot of stresses, but right now, how things are communicated, how things are managed needs to find a solution and to provide a better service.
Thank you, Trustee Nash. Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. So right now, you have said that the MTC program is on pause until at least the end of the school year. Do you know what the inclination of OSTA is likely to be for the next school year? Is OSTA leaning towards returning it, or is OSTA leaning towards not returning it?
That decision has yet to be made in conjunction with, as I mentioned, a risk assessment being undertaken by an external party for outside of OSTA in order to assess some of the risks, such as what Trustee Nash brought up in the system, and to determine whether the existing pool of bus drivers will be able to support returning to the MTC program, or if reintroducing it will increase the risks of issues, again, as Trustee Nash has mentioned.
Follow-up question. How goes efforts to retain or train new bus drivers? A perennial problem.
Yeah. So over this previous summer, OSTA had engaged in the Drive Yellow campaign. That came with some successes. However, the number of drivers that they were able to recruit did not exceed the number of people who left the bus companies. One of the key issues that we are looking at is with regards to retention. The pay, one of the major items that bus drivers do bring up is the pay. The funding from the ministry is one issue. Additionally, that the pay structure is dictated by the individual bus companies, and OSTA only contracts those individual bus companies. So we've reviewed some past attempts at retention bonuses and whatnot, and there were issues stemming from those past attempts that the board is not as open to revisiting for this issue.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right, and we have a question from Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Trustee Lee, one of the challenges facing our rural communities, our students, is the lack of public transportation. There is no public transportation. So when there's school bus cancellations for our rural students, parents are struggling to find alternative options for their students. So I'm just wondering if perhaps OSTA can give priority in terms of choosing which bus routes are being canceled, if they could give priority to our rural communities, perhaps over our suburban, urban communities.
In response to that, the one of the key planning aspects of OSTA and its routing system is that they try to maintain the one bus driver to one route. So the cancellations are usually a result of individual bus drivers calling in sick, and reorganizing the route on the morning of when a bus driver calls in is not something that's realistic within the capabilities of OSTA.
Well, as a former member, though, of OSTA, I am familiar with that. Thank you. And I know that they try to keep the same bus driver for the same routes for familiarity and comfort for the bus driver itself. But we're really struggling now as a community with a shortage of drivers. So I do think our rural communities really need to be prioritized due to the lack of public transportation.
Noted, and I'll take that back to the board.
Thank you. All right, moving down the list of speakers, we have Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Trustee Lee, does OSTA have a timeline that they can provide to us as a board and to our constituents in terms of the risk management assessment? When is it expected to be completed, and when might we able to see? When might we be able to see results?
The intent of the external risk assessment is to be completed within the next couple of months. We've begun that process with reaching out to, can't remember who the exact company consultant is, but we've already begun that process.
Sorry, if I can clarify. When would the general public expect to see some sort of result or changes as a result of the study?
Likely next year. I can't say for sure because we haven't issued a tendering contract for that yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have Trustee Aziz next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Trustee Lee and Trustee Dixon for their work sitting and representing us at OSTA. My question, Trustee Lee, is I understand OC Transpo is doing a strategic route review. Has OSTA reached out to OC Transpo to potentially align, some of the work that's been ongoing, and also to potentially address some of the concerns raised by my colleagues, like Trustee Jenkins' concerns regarding urban and rural busing? If not, is that something that we could ask you guys to bring forward?
Yep. So General Manager Kiriako does speak with her OC Transpo counterparts consistently, as OC Transpo is a critical part of the student transportation network. As I'm sure you're aware as well, that their OC Transpo itself has been having issues with their route network. The specifics I'm not as aware of compared to the general manager. So if there are specific questions, she is always reachable by email, and she can answer your specific questions.
Sorry, Chair, may I clarify, ask a clarifying question? Are there plans though for a formal review that OC Transpo is undertaking right now for like that's happening right now, for that to be in collaboration with OSTA, or to consult with OSTA on like the root issues, like the ones that Trustee Jenkins have brought up and my colleagues have also brought up?
General Manager Kiriako would be the best person to ask for that. That has not been brought up at the directors meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now we have Trustee Nash.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Do our school buses have mandatory snow tires?
That's something that would have to be brought with the general manager. I don't know the answer to that one.
Just a follow-up comment, because I knew of someone who actually had the full training as a bus driver and then found out that the bus didn't have any snow tires, and that caused the person to decide not to drive the bus.
Okay, and trustee Scott.
Thank you. I'd just like to follow up on the issue that trustee Jenkins raised. It's one thing when you don't have a bus driver for a day or a couple of days or even for a week. Parents in the rural areas where there are no alternatives struggle and manage. However, it's another thing altogether when you don't have a bus driver for a route for 6 weeks. That puts people's jobs in jeopardy, and it raises absolute havoc with their families' lives, with their children's ability to get to school, to access the public education that we provide. And I think that I understand very well the safety issues associated with saying, well, why don't we just swap the driver around? Because it takes time to learn each route and time to learn the children on that route and the stops. And it opens it up to a whole lot of accidents like the one that trustee Nash referred to. But I sincerely hope that there is a huge effort being made to try to make sure that if there is a spare driver, it is possible to cover for those long-term absences, because they are devastating for a lot of families.
Yep, and to clarify, we in our last director meeting, the general manager did provide us an update with regards to cancellations in the system. The number of long-term cancellations in the system has dramatically dropped since the beginning of the school year. However, the number of short-term cancellation of specific routes has stayed steady from a variety of reasons. From moving, where they can, they have moved some routes and drivers, but a lot of them is just drivers calling in sick 1 or 2 days, and those short-term cancellations persist.
I appreciate that very much, and I'm glad that the OSTA board is talking about it. But unfortunately, knowing that the number of long-term absences has dropped significantly is small comfort for the person who still hasn't had a bus show up at their house for 6 weeks.
Thank you, trustee Scott. Are there any other questions for OSTA? All right, seeing none, let's move on to new business. Is there any new business? Okay, seeing none, I now declare this meeting adjourned.